Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome on this beautiful Christmas Eve night. Let's have some beautiful Gregorian chant playing, which is some of the most healing music actually that you can listen to. And from my realm of teaching sound healing, I've discovered that they've done actually scientific studies to find out what is the most healing music. And Gregorian chant came out number one, Vedic chanting in second. And in these studies, they discovered that this music had the ability to actually repair and heal our DNA, which is very, very powerful. So, just going to have some Gregorian chant in the background. I hope you can hear it. And I'm just going back and forth from OBS to the comments here, so feel free to comment and let me know if there's any sound issues. But I think it should be coming out pretty loud and clear. I'm going to move to another microphone in a moment, but just catching some ambient sounds here. So, on that note, let me move over here. Okay, everyone can hear me, good. Sounds lovely, thank you, Sonia. Okay, so should even be more clear coming from this microphone. So thank you everyone for joining me here tonight on this blessed Christmas Eve. And I'm coming to you here from Costa Rica. And it's quite a mild evening here, and we had a really beautiful day of Soul Family coming together and having a brunch at our dear friend Kata's right on the beach. And it was just really a lovely day. And I'm very excited to be here with you tonight, probably for the next hour as we go over the portal into Christmas. So I'm excited to bring you some wisdom transmissions on our beautiful brother Jesus, or Yeshua as he is more traditionally known. And I have a nice cup of warm cacao that I've made to keep me company. Maybe you've made some yourself intuitively. And I'm just going to get a few crystal bowls toning here. I'm going to draw us into a nice opening meditation as I just turn down the Gregorian chant for a moment. So once again, thank you for being here with me, and let's tune in, shall we? So wherever you are, just take a moment, if you can find a nice meditative seat, and just begin to find your breath. And you can close your eyes here. And start to relax your body and letting out a few nice ventilating cathartic sighs into the space, and just emptying out any tensions that you may have gathered in your day, in your mind, in your heart, in your soul. Let's do it together. Let's breathe in nice and deep. And once again, just releasing any tension within our being through the beautiful cathartic sigh, breathing in. To draw your awareness within yourself, just tuning in to your blessed inner world, and imagine that you are breathing in the breath of the earth. For it is said in mystical and indigenous wisdom traditions that the air that we breathe is truly breath of Mother Gaia, the great goddess, who we will be discussing tonight as well, and its relevance to the story of Yeshua, Jesus. So imagine with every breath that you're being woven into the world of love that is this sacred planet that we call Earth. And feel the presence of the great goddess, who the ancient Gnostics called Sophia or Sophia, Gaia Sophia. Begin to imagine the world of her living light that our ancient ancestors affirmed and attested in their initiations and ceremonies when they would expand and amplify their consciousness and witness this world of living light suffusing all aspects of reality, their own bodies, the walls of their temple spaces, and outside in all the lands there was this flowing living light. And that sight upon this holy light, Holy Spirit of Mother Gaia, Gaia Sophia, would send the adepts into a great and healing sense of awe, where their wonder would become a prayer. And the light would also begin to instruct them. It would communicate to them, telling them of their gifts and their medicines, and help guiding them on their way, on their sacred path of life and soul evolution. And this voice of the wisdom goddess, Gaia Sophia, is being recovered and remembering in our great awakening times. So taking a moment here as I move into the silence and singing a simple invocation to the great goddess as Jesus and many of the ancient mystics would have done, always honoring the great mother as well as source, the creator, great mystery. I sing this invocation to our universal mother, that all the great masters like Yeshua, Jesus, would know that we are sourced from, that we are loved from, that the origin of love is also found in the bosom of our universal mother. the soul of our mother, the wisdom goddess, imbuing you with that great divine nous, that great wisdom, intelligence that is innate to us all as divine humans. So drawing yourself back, just finding your beautiful breath. Beginning to slowly open the eyes, coming back to your sacred space. So, today, Christmas Eve and almost Christmas, and the word means the Christ Mass, the honoring of Christ, which is not just the person that we know as Jesus, but the word Christ actually means the anointed one, just as the term Buddha means anointed one. So this term Christ Mass is also a hearkening to this anointing that happens and can happen to every human being when we reclaim the essence of our humanity, the essence of our human nature, which is not to be only this material form of a physical body and a physical being, but also a metaphysical being, something beyond an encapsulating of the physical. And Jesus was one of those great masters who was initiated into the wisdom of the ages in such places as Egypt and the great temple schools, the great mystery schools of the ancient world, where human beings would be set on these pathways, these sacred pathways, where they would come into touch with the mysteries, which were the great wisdoms of existence, to answer those mysterious questions, such as, what is our true origin of humanity? What is this drama that we call mortal existence? Do we have adversaries? Is there good? Is there evil? What does it mean to evolve the soul? What is the soul? Those great deep questions would be the focus of these mystery schools, and adepts like Jesus and Magdalene and many, many, many great masters would be initiated and graduated into this wisdom, into this evolution. So the Christ Mass is not only an honoring of this great avatar master that we know as Jesus, but it also is an honoring of this anointing that we all go through as human beings when we start to walk that path of beauty that is the path of our soul being the captain of our life. So just to give you a bit of a background of my own story. So I was raised in a Catholic family. My father was South African and he was Catholic. And from a very young age, I attended church and Sunday school. And I can tell you right off the bat, I never related to church. I never felt connected. And the chief reason why was because I was very bored while I was there. I think there was an innate sort of knowing in me that there was something not quite right about all the pomp and circumstance, the regalia of the religious ceremonies. I remember also finding it particularly morbid and even frightening to see before this altar at this very beautiful and big church that we're at, this gigantic statue of Jesus nailed to the cross in this horrifying image of nails through his feet and blood and bleeding. It was the first image of brutal violence that I'd ever seen in my life. And I know that that did not give me a good feeling. So it was, and I was about 10, 11. My father, who was a very good man, he gave my sister and I the option, because he could tell that we weren't really connecting. We weren't really interested in this path. So he said, do you want to go to church anymore? And I remember I was playing with my Transformers with Optimus Prime. And in that moment, and I would sneak my Transformers into church and play them in the pews as these sermons would go on.
And I felt in that moment, I was like, I choose Optimus Prime. I choose to transform with these Transformers. And I was joyful to not have to go to this drudgery anymore. When I was 22, I experienced a spiritual awakening in my life, and it was definitely my kind of BC to AD moment as we measure Gregorian time before Christ and after Christ. For me, it was that kind of thing. My life forever changed when I was 22 in April of that year. I had a profound epiphany where I realized the divine in my life, and my life has been forever changed since. And I became ardently obsessed with spirituality for the next year or so, especially. Every book of wisdom, mysticism I could get my hands on, every workshop, I started doing meditation and yoga. I was just so in love with the divine, and I wanted to know, and I wanted to experience these deeper layers of the divine. It was around that time that I was introduced to one of the most powerful spiritual books called The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And Eckhart Tolle actually talks about Jesus and Christ consciousness even as being this state of being in the present moment. And this is something that we all have access to, and something that Jesus was actually trying to teach us in a very humble way. And I'm going to get a little deeper into that when we go into the Christ consciousness activation. But I also want to share that I also started to find myself discovering all these other interpretations of Jesus' story and Jesus' life. And I know this might be controversial to people, because when we look at the story of Jesus, there are people who are very connected to the religions, to the institutions that follow the Bible as holy writ. And the Bible is where they find all of their truth and the authority upon their truth. And that is their path. The fact of the matter is, there are thousands of paths, millions of paths even, toward the divine. And the true energy of Christ, which is our divine humanity, is this incredible, ultimate, cosmic lovingness, this infinite, eternal lovingness that accepts and honors all of these different paths and ways to the divine. It doesn't matter what names you call it, what practices you bring to bear. What really matters is what is the quality that you bring forth in your being, which is the proof if those practices are actually effective in your life. And we are given all these opportunities, especially in this age that we live in right now. We live in this profound age of awakening, where I don't think we fully can really acknowledge, and we need to, just how amazing this time is that we live in. I've been a great student of history, because as I start to get more interested in spirituality and the story of Jesus, I started to go back and study, what happened to the pagans, for instance, because at a certain point I got very interested in discovering my indigenous European identity. And I started to realize that there were a lot of ancient civilizations that were absolutely wiped away, and there was no record of them in our conventional education through our school systems. We were not told about them. It was really only in my own 20s, and then continuing onward to this day, that I started to take control of my own education sovereignly and start to study for myself. And what I've discovered is that when you go back through history, there are incredibly different tales about the story of Jesus. And you start to realize that there was a great suppression of information. There was a great severing of information. One of the most emphatic episodes of this in our human history is the burning of the Library of Alexandria by the Romans. And we have to ask ourselves, why would they burn the biggest library that to this day has ever existed on this planet? This library that was a collection place of all the great wisdom and knowledge of humanity. The burning of this library in some ways was a decapitation of our collective intellect. It was a plunging forth of ourselves collectively into an amnesia, of losing the thread and connection to all these different wisdoms and knowings. It was in some ways a regression. And that is something that we need to take into account. And when we look at also some of the, in my mind, some of the challenges with the Bible, and the thing is, when I make constructive criticisms about the Bible or religion, for those of you out there who follow the Bible like Holy Writ, that may trigger you some. And this is not something personal. This is something about just understanding the mechanism of history itself, that the Bible, much like many Holy Writ documents, is written by humans. And there have been many stages of the Bible being suppressed, of being distorted, being redacted. I think of the Council of Nicaea, when the Emperor Constantinople gathered, his people in Rome, and they decided to consolidate the Bible, which apparently was thousands of pages long of folk tales and different teachings on Jesus, into something that was very concise and easy to understand for the masses. And I always had a problem with this biblical teaching. I find the Bible beautiful, don't get me wrong, especially the New Testament, the story of Jesus. Some of the teachings that Jesus gives there are eternal. Just in the same way, when I read the Bhagavad Gita and the great teachings of Krishna brought tears in my eyes, I've wept before the teachings of Jesus that I found in the Bible. They are stunning and beautiful. But I will share, and this is just my personal story, that when I read the Bible, there was a part of me that felt unfulfilled somehow, because the 4 Gospels written by these 4 different apostles were so short. There were only a few dozen pages or longer, just brief stories of what we're told is one of the most legendary and most impactful historical figures on our collective story. I also felt that there was huge gaps missing in his story. There's like an anecdote. There's his birth, of course, which is beautiful, and there's all these synchronicities with the 3 wise men, and then all of a sudden there's like a small anecdote when he's a child, and then he's 33, and we have the drama of the crucifixion and his persecution and beautiful teachings like the Sermon on the Mount. But I kept asking myself, like, what about all of these other years? Like, what was Jesus like as a teenager? What was puberty like for him? What was it like to have sexual urges? Did he ever have a romantic life? Was he a celibate? These were big questions to me, because deep in my being, I longed to relate to Jesus as a brother. And there was something about the way the church had told me things as a child, and how when I read the Bible, I felt like Jesus was somehow this alien avatar on this very high and distant plane, almost impossible to relate to. And he was teaching me these amazing things. And yet, as I've discovered in life, the best teachers that I've met are the ones who are living examples of their teachings. And this is not to say that Jesus wasn't. He was clearly a very impeccable and incredibly sagacious, masterful human being who was possibly initiated into the wisdom of the ages and was an adept at so many esoteric and spiritual arts, and was able to live through the pure truth of his soul and his heart, and to transmit eternal truths as other great spiritual masters have done. But there was still this moment for me, this grave feeling of like, I don't feel connected to him. I can't relate to him. And sexuality was a huge thing for me. I was trying to understand, as Carl Jung discusses in some of his psychoanalytical work, one of the biggest challenges that we go through as human beings is taking these very primal energies, and how do we relate them to our human divinity? These primal energies that want to have sex and make love and lust, fiery energies. How do we marry them to these more cool and pure sort of higher chakra visions of the divine? This is one of the big conundrums, and we see this playing out in a lot of the fallen guru scenarios, where gurus who propound themselves to be these holy living beings, and then behind the scenes they're found to be sexual abusers and misbehave in different ways. And so it's to me, it's telling us this tale that, wow, there's still this big challenge that we have here. And I think one of the problems in this is that the masters that we're told to look up to, like Jesus, their stories leave something unfulfilled. It doesn't allow us to relate to them as a human being enough to fully help us understand how to deal with these energies. Like sex, for example. There's hardly any pure teachings from Jesus around sex. Like how to truly make love to another human being in a loving, respectful, and honoring way. And so in my 20s, I started to find myself discovering stunning other wisdoms, such as Gnosticism, the writings of Samuel Ovar, the great Colombian mystic who wrote a lot about Jesus and Mary Magdalene and how they had a very sacred sexual relationship, and they used the sexual arts to raise their souls into these more exalted states where they could really go through this process of remembering and divinizing themselves through inducing these mystical states of consciousness where they could truly remember themselves through the illusion of all the Maya and the materiality that can make us seem so lost in just this limited egoic sense of I'm just me, Darren, rather than being this person who's connected to this conduit of something much greater and cosmic than myself, and feeling an apprehension of the eternity of my soul that reincarnates, that death is this doorway to this other passage from lifetime to lifetime. These are the wonders and the mysteries that we would teach in these spiritual universities of antiquity. So in Samuel Alvar's teachings, it was my first encounter and like, aha, this is what I can relate more to this story of Jesus. Another stunning text for me was the Aquarian Gospel of Jesus Christ, channeled by Levi H. Dowling in the late 19th century. And he was an American preacher who was given a vision as he was a young boy, and he was a prodigal preacher. I think he was already preaching as a teenager. He was like one of those gifted kind of Christian mystics, and he had visions of angels appearing to him. Even he remembers in a crib, and telling him that one day he would build this white temple, this shining white temple. And then they reappeared later in his life and announced that they needed him to kind of trans-channel, write down the true story of Jesus, because it had been distorted, it had been redacted, it had been censored, and that story needed to come more fully into fruition. Now, the Aquarian Gospel doesn't talk about Magdalene, it doesn't talk about Jesus having a relationship, but it does fill in all those blanks. It talks about him being a teenager, it talks about him going to all these different places, like ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, even India, even Tibet, and learning all these great wisdoms as the masters and the mystical artists of their time would be doing, touring around and learning all of these great teachings, so that one day when they were anointed as a Christ or a Buddha, as one of those spiritual masters, which would then disseminate the teachings that would uplift other human beings and mentor them into this greater sense of our human selfhood, they would need to do all of that. And I found that book incredibly inspiring. Now, I've mentioned Magdalene a few times, and for me, discovering Magdalene was like it was like my second coming. When I found Magdalene, it was like the divine feminine was then reintroduced into my life. And I started to realize, as I studied, Christianity and the history, the torrid history of this religion as it got woven in with empire and became a colonial power, I started to realize that women and the divine feminine and the goddess was erased intentionally by these empires that took these beautiful teachings of Jesus and kind of distorted and corrupted them, so that human beings were not given access to the true teachings of Jesus, the true inspiration of his life, so they could be really empowered. Rather, they were enslaved into like elite priestly castes who held this kind of authority position of being these emissaries to God. Whereas in the ancient world, everyone was sort of welcome into this state of Gnosticism, where each individual had the ability to have their own direct relationship to the divine, to God. Now, I'm going to say some bold things now that may sound very controversial, and this is just me sharing my own story. And what I've realized as I've been meditating the last few days and leading up to this transmission is that I've really been in love with Jesus for a long time, with his life, with his inspiration. I've been so interested and curious in him, and it's led me into all these different discoveries in some ways, such as the discovering of Gnosticism and the great goddess traditions that were pre-Christian. And the fact is, for tens of thousands of years now, we're starting to realize with archaeological finding that there were cultures of high adept spirituality for thousands of years before Jesus. And yet, when Jesus showed up, the decades and centuries afterwards, religious empires started to take those teachings and weaponize them, and there was like a severing of our past, of all these wisdom of the ages, such as the eraser of the goddess. And so this led us into this dark age of ignorance, where we forgot these teachings, and then those who wanted to recover them were persecuted, were called heretics, which means someone who chooses again, who chooses not to just be in this one law of the Roman Catholic Christian Church, but rather, hey, I want to go and study maybe some of these mystical gospels or alternative stories, or I want to study yoga or something. During those times, you would be hunted down and killed for declaring such things. We have to acknowledge that. We cannot forget the crimes and the great intensity with which Christianity became weaponized and distorted from a pure, loving vision of our divine humanity into a weapon of empire, where you had no choice but to follow these edicts or these teachings, with Jesus now as your savior. And if you chose not to, if you chose to resist, you were often killed and eliminated. By 200 AD in the Roman Christian Empire, if you identified as a pagan, which was a European indigenous being who honored the goddess and polytheism, you were just punishable by death. That was law. This is very harsh. This is very brutal. We cannot forget these things. We need to bring these things back into our understanding. Now, I will say that I've been a little alarmed and concerned to see so many people returning to Jesus and returning to Christianity without acknowledging these things that I'm mentioning, which feels like a very gross spiritual bypass. The fact is, I believe that one of the reasons there's a great resurgence of Jesus in our collective consciousness right now is because I think he, as a force, as a true dimension of consciousness within all of us, is attempting to draw us closer to him again, so that we can actually start in this great age where information is at our very fingertips, on our computers, on our phones. I mean, it's just amazing. And we can read and we can practice and we could say things very openly now in this great age of awakening. Whereas just hundreds of years ago, if I were to declare, I'm very interested in learning more about Mary Magdalene, I would be maybe burned to death on the stake. Now we have this freedom, this opportunity, and I believe Jesus' story is becoming so pronounced again because it needs to be truly understood. It needs to be clarified. It needs to be purified and cleansed from all the toxicities of colonialism, which have muddled, which have polluted his story. And the humanization of Jesus is very important when we start to realize that Magdalene was his spiritual counterpart, that perhaps this energy of Christ was something that they galvanized together through their divine union. And the use of sexuality as a true esoteric art form that can amplify, that can heal, that can enthuse our connection to the divine, to God, Goddess. These things need to be elaborated, they need to be taught. Because a lot of the problems we face in the world as we're still trying to dismantle patriarchy is that men and women have been pitted against each other. We've been draining each other. We are swaddled into all this shame and this dominator hierarchy of patriarchy, which keeps the feminine down and women down, and has for thousands of years. And we live in this amazing time where the goddess is making a comeback and the divine feminine is vying to be in this equanimous relationship again with the divine masculine. And this is working out in each of our very souls, because we are man and woman, we are masculine and feminine, lunar and solar within ourselves. So this is very important to do this work. So these stories, to me, these reclaimings, we need to have a spirit of openness and curiosity around this. We can't just dismiss them. I was speaking to a friend the other day, and they very much identify with, being a born-again Christian. And I was trying to tell them, how much studying the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Essene Gospels, the Nag Hammadi Library, the folk tales of Mary Magdalene that are now coming to the surface, because we have to acknowledge we live in a time now where those that were persecuted, the heretics, those that committed blasphemy, they're all now having an opportunity to share this wisdom. And there's these great founts of hidden wisdom that's been suppressed for thousands of years now flowing to the surface, and it can be very overwhelming for those who have been following a very ordered edict, like just following the Bible as the Holy Writ, and everything else is absolute BS or illusion. That can be very challenging. But in my opinion, we need to have this very open conversation, especially when we acknowledge what we've done to ourselves in the name of religion, such as Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. It's very clear that these religions have a lot to answer for. They distorted our humanity, caused us to create untold suffering. The last 2,000 years is a very miserable, terrifying, haunting, brutal story of a humanity that's been acting out in a very insane way, to the point where we now are living in this incredibly insane situation where still the biggest problem on the planet is we've aborted ourselves from the sacred ecology of the planet, which is directly connected to our severing our connection to the sacredness of our Mother Earth. This is why indigenous peoples were destroyed by religious empires, because they chose to go against the cross. They said, no, the sacred earth is my teacher. Just like the mystery school adepts said, no, my teacher is Sophia, our great mother. So to me, we have a responsibility to really check these systems, because these systems in that moment did not act very Christian. They weren't like, oh, well, I'm just going to love and respect you unconditionally. No, they decided to just brutally destroy those people. They condescended, saw them as savages. They even went to the point where they said by killing them, they were saving them, which is very distorted. And now we live in the most insane proposition, which is we've actually destroyed the ecology of our planet, because a lot of the Judeo-Christian logic and Islam logic is that this planet is a fallen world. There are scriptures in all of those traditions to talk about how we can just exploit and use this world. This isn't the real world. So you can see how this is a very long and tattered tale. But really what I'm trying to get to, as my friend said to me the other day, they were trying to say, all these lost gospel stuff, they're totally unreliable. They're written like 200 years after the fact. How can you listen to them? And my response is that, well, when we look at how many people have been suppressed, how people have been censored with brutality and violence by these religious institutions, when you think of the death of Hypatia, in Alexandria, she was a mystery school adept teacher, a brilliant polymath, and when she was killed just a few hundred years after Christ, she was torn to shreds and brutally murdered by a Christian mob because she was, her polemics, her argumentative debates were so brilliant that she would just destroy the Christians in their debates, and they got jealous and they wanted to silence her because her arguments were holding certain truths that were very challenging for them. When you take those things, we have to hold those need to be held accountable. Those incidents, we can't just ignore those away. We have to wonder, like, these lost gospels, were they suppressed? Was the reason that they were found 200 years later is because maybe someone finally wasn't silenced and they were able to speak them? When we look at how much, the Library of Alexandria, how much there's been this intentional suppression of wisdom and teachings, and to me, we have to be very scrutinizing of all of this. The history itself just speaks to that. There's been a very poor track record of actually acknowledging and disseminating what is truth and what is the truth about our story and our wisdom. And that's very important. I would also say that the actual being Jesus, the actual teachings of Jesus, and this may sound very bold, but for some of you maybe not, because other people write about this. I think of Barbara Hanklau and her recent trilogy of books around Jesus and Mary Magdalene. And when you look at the Vatican and the crimes of the Catholic Church, how it's like the nexus for sexual abuse on the planet, and the nexus for the Crusades and the killing of indigenous people, the genocide of indigenous people, not only in places like Turtle Island, North America, and Central and South America, but in Europe as well. when you start to look at that, you start to realize, like, my gosh, this is a horrible thing that has taken place. And when you start to see that and acknowledge that, you realize, wow, we've truly, in some ways, regressed. And the story of Jesus, in my mind, has been willfully and intentionally corrupted. And this is where it gets confusing. It's been corrupted by the religion itself that is trying to propound this as supreme truth. I believe the Catholic Church was actually trying to suppress the true teachings of Jesus, did not want humans to be so empowered. Because if you remember in some of the tales of Jesus, Jesus was actually going against the religious tenets. He was trying to break us away from what the Gnostics and the mystery schools that were probably teaching him were telling him, that there is also false gods. There are also nemesis, adversaries in our midst that are deceivers. That's their chief weapon, and they're trying to take humanity off its proper course of evolution. And I believe Jesus was trying to break us away from those traditions to clarify. And that's why when you read the Old and the New Testament, the God in both of those books seems very different. Very different. The God in the Old Testament is warring, is brutal, is envious, is devious. Whereas the God that Jesus talks about in the New Testament is loving, is wise, unifying. You can feel this. And Jesus talks about this in some of the other Gospels, how he came to truly bring a sword to give us, the ability to sever ties with some of these disillusioned traditions. That if he was in the Gnostic mystery schools, they would have been telling him that these beings, these demons, what they call the archons, were truly planting belief systems that were distorted in our midst. And we had to really check them and challenge them. Anyhow, there's so many rabbit holes that we can go along this path. And if you want to dive a bit deeper, in my book, Love's Revolution, there's two short stories that bookend the book. There's the beginning story, The Rise of Eve, where I retell the story of the story of Genesis, where Eve is exalted as this kind of beautiful heroine, inspired by the Nag Hammadi library, which was found in 1945, which dates back almost 2,000 years, which are some of the mystery school texts. And in those texts, there's a peculiar episode where Eve is confronted by these demons, these archons, and instead of being this like weak kind of easily manipulated human as we see in Genesis, she actually laughs at them and flings this kind of like supernatural light in their eyes and disappears from view, and is able to easily and massively evade them like a real spiritual ninja. I was very inspired by that rendering of a very empowered woman. And then the last story in my book, The Divine Union of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, is about their conscious relationship, their divine romance, and their sacred sexuality, and how they're using sexuality as a spiritual soul-blending force to purify and embolden their connection to the divine. But really, when we ultimately come to all of these different interpretations, we can, talk and argue and get in all these polemics, but in some ways it's really just a distraction. And it's fascinating, the things I've been sharing. I'm very fascinated. A lot of this is very compelling information. But as we get into now the Christ consciousness activation, I really believe that as important as it is to, what is to know what our true story is, and to acknowledge that history has all these episodes of suppression, and we live in a time where truth is really coming to the surface to help us clarify what is really real about our story and our reality. When we look at what Jesus and many other masters were trying to teach us, I really love this Gnostic idea that Christ is just trying to remind us that Christ consciousness is a remembering of our own divinity. Because something that all the masters have said is that human mortal existence is this kind of cosmic play, this Leela, where we forget ourselves. And then we get conditioned by a culture of forgetfulness into over-identification with the ego, which is this limited identification as just me as myself, as this kind of self-interested being. Whereas we forget about the transpersonal self, the ultimate self that's connected to this much greater sense of our reality. And it's very important that we do these spiritual works.
because we start to understand that
The true teaching is really quite simple. Christ consciousness is just being so present in the present moment that you come in contact with the essence of yourself. And this is something and why meditation will always be a tried and tested spiritual practice that we all should do if we really believe we are spiritual beings and we are evolving ourselves. I truly believe, this is my humble opinion from my own life experience, we can have all the fantastical psychedelic plant medicine experiences that we want, but that's an external tool that's doing something to us. But when you meditate, you are self-initiating yourself into the practice of feeling a connection to your great self, to your true self, to your soul self, to that Christ within you, that truly divine essence of your humanity. And if you've ever meditated, or if you've worked with the Presence Process by Michael Brown, or if you've read Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now, which I highly recommend, it's truly a book just exemplifying and illustrating Christ consciousness. You realize that it's just a dimension of consciousness that we can access when we become present. Paradoxically, we don't go just in. Something also expands outward. We come into our heart center. We move from the intellect, which is limited by these two hemispheres of the brain. This, that, right, wrong, left, right, good, evil. The kind of trap of dualistic thinking. But when we meditate, we actually drop our energy field down into our heart, and our heart then expands out into its toroidal field. It's some scientists say it's thousands of times more powerful. It's an electromagnetic field than the brain, than the intellect. And when we're in the heart synthesizes, it unifies. That's what love does. It brings things together. This is why Leo Tolstoy says, everything I understand in the world, I understand because I love. So anytime you're confused about something, like a conflict is going on in your life, the first thing you should do is actually get into the vibration of giving love to that first, setting that as the foundation, because love opens things, it synthesizes, it brings that unity consciousness in. And that corpus callosum, that bridge between the two hemispheres, gets activated when we meditate. So we go into this unified thinking, this synthesized thinking, where we become one. We become a living embodiment of oneness, and that is Christ consciousness. That is what Yeshua is inherently trying to teach us. His teachings are actually very simple. This is why I understand some of the more dogmatic teachings that some Christians have about, like, I don't believe in astrology, I don't believe in yoga, blah, 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 blah. I mean, there's a half-truth there. I personally believe Jesus was probably initiated into a lot of those things, and I use a lot of those tools. They're very fascinating and enthusing of my life and my evolution. But one thing we have to realize is that the heart and soul of the spiritual matter is living moment to moment in this deeper, more authentic consciousness. We have to acknowledge, as Eckhart Tolle says, that most of the time we're just living asleep in the past, in the future. We're rarely in this present moment. And this is just a concept. You need to live this, and we're going to do a little meditation before we do the sonic channeling. You need to live this in your life. Meditation is not simply sitting, as I do every day. I sit in my posture and I meditate for 25 to 30 minutes every day, just fasting the mind, just watching the mind, and just this natural process starts to happen as I drop into my heart. It's a natural process, which is very beautiful. You don't have to force anything. The Taoists are right. It's a wu wei. It's a do nothing. And when you do nothing, something else does on a metaphysical level. But what I love about what Eckhart Tolle and people like Samuel Alvar did is they take that and say, hey, but you should be meditating at all times. So Samuel Alvar says you should be actually like all day long auto-reflecting, coming back to yourself constantly. Coming back to that Christ within, who you really are, that divine self, all the time, coming back. And how do you do that? You feel your body. Your body is blessedly in the present moment. Your heart is. If your heart wasn't, if it decided to dream about the past or the future for a moment, you might have a heart attack. It would lose its rhythm. That would be very dangerous, right? So the heart is always in that present moment. And when you get in that present moment, you're actually in a whole other state of consciousness. Insights come to you. Revelations come to you. It's like you're plugged into God, into the divine. And you truly are. That's exactly what's happening. So yes, we shouldn't be, as Samuel Alvar rightly said, we have to have this balance in life between doing and being. So yes, are you doing the astrology? Are you reading all these esoteric books? Are you doing all these spiritual practices? But how often are you just being in the present moment and just being with the benediction of that soul consciousness? Because when you're in that, you start to grow, this relationship to this greater divine consciousness. This is kind of the play of life. It's not that these are divided, they're all in a spectrum. But when you're really concerned with just yourself, your consciousness gets very tight. It's very much in the ego. Whereas when you expand through meditation or chanting, or whatever practices, anything can be an entry point into this present moment. You can be present in anything. Being present in sexuality is one of the great secret doctrines, because when you're present in sexuality, your genitals are generators. That's when you can generate the most robust, voluptuous energies. And when you're present to them, you truly start to realize maybe one of the real uses of sex is actually to induce the greatest mystical states of consciousness where we feel totally connected to the divine. That's very, very profound. And Don Juan, Carlos Castaneda's teacher, would say, every act that you do in your life, in your daily life, whether it's washing the dishes, cutting the vegetables, making the smoothie in the morning, do them all as if it's your last act on earth, with that kind of attention, like so much attention, like you're riveted with wonder at every single moment of your life. It takes that kind of commitment. This is what yoga literally means. It means yoking yourself to the moment all the time. And this takes practice at the beginning, because we're so identified with just this kind of lazy, slumbering consciousness. It's just going all over the place. Past, future, what am I doing tomorrow? This pain, this anxiety, blah, blah, blah. Rather than staying in this kind of spiritual fortitude of being in the present moment. And of course, we're not bypassing when things come up. You can sit with them. Take this consciousness into your triggers. Take them into your traumas. Take them into your pain in your life. This consciousness is a greater consciousness plugged into this greater intelligence, this divine intelligence. This is when we really start to realize what we really are as human beings. This is what Yeshua is really trying to teach us. So, I hope that resonates. And there's so much more I could say, but we are now on the Christ Mass day for those of you in the Eastern time zone. So let me take you now through this portal, and we're going to activate this sense of Christ consciousness, which again is just a remembering of our own divinity. So I'm just going to have a quick look on the comments, see how everyone is doing out there. It's so great to have so many of you with me in this. Okay, so glorious to see all of you. So I'm going to get us into some sacred sound. So I invite you now just to take a moment to start to find that meditative posture once again. Closing down the eyes. Starting to relax your breathing. Breathing nice and deep into the belly. Relaxing your body. Yourself into the holy temple of your soul, the heart's center, energetically in the center of your chest. And in this space, let us begin to call on the great master, teacher, and avatar, Yeshua Jesus. And I'd like us to also invite Magdalene, his spiritual counterpart, into our heart. inviting these two beings and imagining them in our heart, holding us and transmitting their love and wisdom. And feeling your heart shining, holding them as part of your soul family, as no different than you, a divine human being, an ardently devoted human being to the path of the divine, of acknowledging the natural divinity and original blessing of our humanity, and seeking passionately to bring that forth from the chrysalis of our ego, to allow, to unfold, to relate to what we really are through the committed practices of meditation, reflection, contemplation, and feeling that light in your heart shining into every cell of your body and pouring out this divine radiance of the divine, feeling yourself woven with the divinity of this world, with Mother Earth and Great Source Consciousness. Feeling yourself being anointed, becoming one, phasing into this Christ consciousness, into this present moment, where you feel your natural divinity is not something necessarily fantastic, but just the normal mundanity of being sweetly brilliant, sweetly able to channel, receive insights and revelations, and most importantly of all, to be kind and loving to each being, not only humans, but all creatures, all life forms, the animals, the plants, because we realize when we're in this deeper consciousness, we feel it, we know it, we embody it, that we are one with all this, that we honor all creation. Feeling yourself expanding into that expression of Christ consciousness. As I now move into our sound channeling, reveling in this. Beginning to draw yourself back to that beautiful connection to your life, to that breath of life, to the breath of the goddess. As she breathes you, as she holds you forever in her arms, her life-giving arms, suckling you to her world of love. Feel that with every breath in and out, this relating to this divine life. And feel the peace and the serenity of going into the portal of this present moment, where you are no longer just your thoughts, the thinking intellect, but you cross through a portal, through present moment awareness, into this greater awareness, into this higher, deeper, wider consciousness, connecting you with something even cosmic, into realms that guide, that fill you with insights, revelations. And you take the wisdom of your discernment there too. Whereas the Gnostics and the mystery schools decried, we are not alone in this reality. There are tricksters, there are deceivers, nothing to fear, something to be aware of. We can use the felt sense of our intuition to know what is true because we feel it. Truth is a deep feeling, a definition of our embodiment, a vibration that we palpably come to know through this living faith of devotion to this present moment of awareness, where the soul is given captaincy of our being. And then it becomes so simple. We don't need to do esoteric Olympics. We make this the very foundation of our life, this devotion to life through every breath, aware that we are living, taking our attention span away from all these distractions that whittle us down from feeling the great expanse of mindfulness and presence. We spend each day in devotion to every moment, for every moment is sacred. Whether washing the dishes, sitting and listening to the ocean, staring out at the night sky, speaking to a friend, every moment is a precious opportunity to bring this consciousness to bear, to enthuse it and strengthen it through our attentiveness to what is happening here and now in all the splendorous wonders of life, the vicissitudes. And we find there this steadiness, this balance, this solid soulness that isn't so wavered anymore by circumstance. For the more we grow and relate to this consciousness in this simple presence, it grows. Just as like the soul, through the affection, the lovingness of our attention, which is the greatest generosity we can give ourselves and others. It's like watering the garden of our soul, it grows. We feel this in the beauty and the bubbles of bliss, that natural joy that is defined as contentment, where we just feel happy because we just simply are being. Nothing external added on to ourselves, aside from this inner posture. This is Christ consciousness. It isn't some phantasmagoria of bridging all these multi-dimensions and some crazy fantastic ascension adventure. It's simply bringing this presence to bear to every moment where consciousness opens and expands, and we feel this great magical sense of life all of a sudden opening as well, a subtle beauty that is everywhere in everything. And this will always be the solution to all the great challenges, the wars, the conflicts, the controversies around technological advancement. All of our problems are rooted in this problem of consciousness. Our consciousness is not open, aware enough. We need to continue to grow. This is a contribution we can make. One of the greatest contributions is to earn, to build, to cultivate this relationship with this Christ consciousness, this present moment awareness, and have faith that will change the quality of your life and your existence in a very radical way the more you are devoted to it. So drawing the hands together in a final gesture here, a gesture of union on this Christ Mass day now. Honoring Jesus, this great avatar, this great master, honoring his beloved Magdalene, honoring all the great masters who are not on a higher plane looking down upon us. They are our brothers and our sisters, this great divine human family, showing us the way that we can too walk to become just like them at our essence divine, in the great remembering and restoration of our nature from this adventure, this play and drama of ignorance and forgetfulness which we are set upon, to then go through this incredible love affair of falling back in love with our divinity and the divinity of the universe itself. And honoring the spirit of kindness and love, which is the kin of this universal consciousness that we're enthusing. If there is but a measure that we're on the correct path, that we are truly growing effectively, it is that we should be more loving to ourselves and to the world, more kind. That is the true way. Love is the king, queen. Giving great thanks to this divine existence. Great thanks to be alive in this sacredness, this sweet sacredness. I'm so joyful to be alive with you, with all of you, with each of you, in this beautiful divine life, this holy shifting awakening times where we get to awaken together and help to plant the seeds for building a true spiritual civilization, founded and directed by the great spiritual truths and this great divine consciousness. We are the harbingers, we are the catalysts for this shift. So blessed, so beautiful. Sending a last emanation from your radiant heart that all beings may touch and feel this consciousness of their own natural divinity and grow and cultivate it in their life to bring forth more of the beauty of the soul and the wisdom of the goddess and the truth of the divine through the fount of their heart, to divinize and beautify their life, to make the Tao gleam, as the Taoists would say. I see the divinity in you. I see the Christ consciousness in you. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being alive, for being here with me tonight. So we now pass into this blessed early hour morning, celebrating this beautiful day of our divine humanity, and of the divinity of all creation, all life on earth. The Gnostics said that the return of Christ consciousness, this enthusing of our innate divine humanity, which is happening right now, is also happening to all life on earth. It's not just us. Isn't that blessed to feel that? You can see it in your interactions with the animals. There's more relatability. There's more interactivity. It's a blessed feeling that we're all in this evolutionary leap now. So thank you for spending your precious time with me here today. And I'm sending you so much divine love. So much. I love you all. Take care, take heart, and be glorious. Just looking at some of the comments, thank you all so much for all the love, for everyone, for being here. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Sophia, Sonia, Stephanie. Wow. Love all of you. Until the next divine time, indeed. And I'll repost this as well, like pretty much soon after, so you can share it if you feel inclined with anyone who you think would resonate. Blessed be Mary, Christ consciousness.